Well, Greg, as we head towards the key content of this webinar, the crowdsourcing of contributions towards the Joint Meetings Industry Council Manifesto for Economic Recovery using business events, let's return to our panel for a moment to understand how the industry is coping with meeting in the age of the pandemic.
Everyone speaks about the new normal, but what is the new normal? Business events are not public or mass gatherings.
Which is a line we've been taking to governments and legislators and authorities around the world, with countries like Germany agreeing exhibitions and events are different from festivals, from concerts, etc.
The trade show industry has been very successful for many years in earning that right to be listened to.
Because we can control the events, we can control the meetings, we know who the people is coming, we know that we have excellent protocols in our venues, in our PCOs organizers, that we have excellent protocols in the airlines.
We're all looking for a solution to the same problem. And it's all about, hygiene, giving safety, security, mitigate the risk for not only the event owner, but the delegate. We've got to build consumer confidence that people are going to come and want to meet in a social distancing flavour, if you like.
So all of a sudden, safety is now hip. Safety and health and hygiene management is going to be your baseline. It is expected for all events.
I'm really hesitant in some of the conversations I've seen where it's like, okay, we're here, this is going to be the new normal. I don't think that's the case. I think there's going to be a stage here that we're at, there's going to be a transitional stage, and then we're going to come back to something else.
We need to work on innovative concepts and think future events on different levels. Face-to-face, hybrid, and purely digital.
So event, as what we would know it, need not just be a physical event, it could also be the ongoing web engagement.
There's a lot of new technology that we're evaluating, that everybody is looking at. We've all flipped to a very virtual mode. The future is going to be very different.
The hybrid meeting is going to be critical, but for a destination and an organisation like us, we have to think so innovative right now in terms of how we're going to not only secure these events, they will be smaller, they will be more local, but how do we beam the content to the world?
I can envisage a meeting that previously was for 5,000 people being for 100 selected people, that then is fed back out to the rest, or they go back and seed other meetings in other cities, or I can see all kinds of different models happening.
Necessity is the mother of invention, so I'll be very excited to see what sort of inventions we'll come up with. As the saying goes, never waste a crisis.
The biggest AI meeting in the world that was to come to Sydney at late 2021 is still on the books, but who knows in this COVID world whether those numbers will come. I would say not. I would say there will be a select few of data scientists and engineers, but we will make the most of encouraging those people to come and live and work in Sydney and educate our workforce for those productivity gains.
The destinations who are better about embedding their events in the community are going to be that much more attractive in this interim phase and going to have the sustainable competitive advantage in the longer term. If I'm getting on an airplane to go to Copenhagen next year and going to be willing to sit there and wear a mask for 8 hours and go through whatever painful process of having my temperature checked, it's not to sit in the Bella Center. Bella Center is lovely. It's Nyhavn, it's Copenhagen, it's Torvehalen. It's how do you leverage the assets that you have as a destination to be attractive to delegates and to associations who are planning the meetings? And similarly, how do you get them to understand your benefits and say, let's come together and create something beyond the scope of just the 4 days? Those destinations that get that right are going to have a huge leg up in the coming years, and the rest of the destinations are going to be playing from behind.
The thing that I always have great confidence in is that humans have had a need to meet for millennia.
That human connection and the desire to meet face to face will be as strong as it ever was, though it may look slightly different.
We're incredibly vulnerable to what's going on now. I can't think of another industry which is less well suited to a world where you're not allowed to be within 2 meters of the person next to you.
I think everybody understands that it is very important that it will start again safely, of course, within protocols and rules that are made.
But the fundamentally important role of meetings and congresses will not change. If anything, it is likely to increase.
We have the power to bring people together, whether it's virtually or whether it's face-to-face, to share knowledge, to solve problems, to create employment and to rebuild cities.
So Greg, for destinations, is this a new normal or a transition to something else?
Well, there's so many fascinating comments in what the panel just said. I think I'm going to have to go through them one by one. So firstly, I completely agree with Martin that the instinct for human interaction is not just a deep social instinct. It's also a kind of a creative spark. It's something to do with wanting to be surprised, wanting to have something that is spontaneous, serendipitous. And I think that this leads to a permanent desire to be able to meet. The problem is that we're now in a situation where, for various reasons, it's difficult to meet. It's either considered unsafe, or it's considered impolitic, or it's considered perhaps too expensive. So, as I said right at the beginning, the speed at which we get a comprehensively available and universally trusted vaccine is pretty important here. There's a big difference between 1 year and 2 years for that vaccine to be available in terms of what happens to the meetings industry in the interim. I also think that it's probably important for us to stress that there's kind of 4 stages in the process we're in. Most of us have come out of or on the way out of lockdown now in Asia. We're just ending lockdown in Europe. We're sort of towards lockdown in different parts of North America, but we're right in the middle of lockdown in Latin America. And I think that all places will have a kind of 4-stage process. There'll be a lockdown, there'll be a transition then out of lockdown towards a kind of recovery. That recovery could take a long period of time, depending upon the nature and character and depth of the recession, and that will differ from place to place. And then when we get to the end of the recovery, we're in the new normal. And I think I would argue that the new normal is therefore some combination of what we had before, adjusted by the nature of the recession that we've been through, the continuing challenges we face in terms of human health, plus the 7 themes I outlined right at the beginning of this conversation. So I think it is possible to start to talk about what the new normal is. Now, what does this really mean for business meetings, the meetings industry, conventions, and other things? I think the first thing it means is that Lynn and others are absolutely right to talk about public safety. And it's not just the safety that can occur within the convention centre or within the venues. It's the safety of the whole travel route to get people to the convention. And of course, the more you can use conventions and business meetings and other things as a way of trialing various kinds of health and safety technology, body scanning, health passporting, all of these different things, the more that you can position the meetings industry as a kind of laboratory for technologies that could be used, therefore, more widely in other avenues and venues. The second big issue is, of course, this issue about hybridity. I completely agree with Martin's comments that, in future, the shape and size and structure of these events is going to change, and a smaller number of people will gather for the face-to-face interaction, but a much larger number of people will participate in various ways digitally around the world. This means that the critical ingredients here are going to be the quality of the conversation that is happening face-to-face by those who gather, and how much that creates the demand for a global audience that wants to connect digitally. The depth and the meaningfulness of the interaction that the people who are connecting digitally or remotely have, and then the quality of the experience for the digital participants and how much they feel they've had access to some kind of privileged channel that wasn't otherwise available to them on any other universally available platform. So this requires our meeting hosts and our conveners to to become much, much more skilled at the kind of omni-channel strategy, just in the same way that entertainment providers and retailers have had to become skilled in this over time. And it places a strong accent on the kind of digital and omni-channel enterprise, the customer experience. And then I think Tommy's remarks as a kind of third statement that the places that will be most successful in hosting international visitors will be the ones that are most able to leverage and to congregate local participants so that it becomes meaningful for the international participants to actually come and visit rather than for everybody to participate online. That, of course, is the critical magnet. So if you can bring together the world expertise that you have in your region on a given subject, or you can bring together the most creative people who provide another reason to be there, it's the ability to leverage not just your institutional and territorial assets, but to leverage your home population and to generate their participation that creates, as it were, the draw for the international participants to attend, and therefore for the digital participants from around the world to enjoy a premium experience. So it's a reworking of the value chain of what makes a business event successful. And I think there'll obviously be multiple different forms of these hybrid events. But I think some of the things that Martin and Tommy and Leslie and Matthias were saying are absolutely correct. I think it is possible for us to understand what is the path to the new normal. And I think it's also possible for us to shape what that new normal is.
Well, Greg, let's get on to the main course, so to speak, of what we're speaking about here today. We're crowdsourcing ideas for this JMIC Manifesto for Economic Recovery using Business Events. Here's what our panel had to say about that.
At a time like this, when recovery is so critical to our organization, to our society, to our economy overall, the power of business events is something I think that has to be front and center.
And never has there been a more important time for us as an industry to harness the power of collaboration and community to create positive impact and show our worth to governments.
When dealing with government officials, how do we best go about that? In my opinion, in my experience, we need to focus on the economics, whether it's state, local, regional, national, global.
First of all, the industry needs to define itself and its agenda statistically. You know, that great economic benefit, that $35 billion in Australia, for instance, and we've become very good at the industry in measuring that in just about every country in the world. But we also need to define ourselves strategically as well, and to align our goals and aspirations and the benefits we deliver to align with the strategies and the outcomes that whatever particular government we're dealing with is aiming for.
Although the business event sector is important economically in terms of supporting GDP, jobs and exports, it doesn't have the same level of importance politically, sadly. So what we need to do is find a way to express that value and the true importance of our industry in political terms, not just economic terms.
But also to concentrate on the legacy, what's left behind when those delegates that we bring into our cities return to their home venues. What's the legacy that they leave behind for the benefit of that society?
We should be flexible in our approach with the politicians. It's not easy. They have a big problem today. They have a big problem to solve. So we have to convince them with clear arguments that many events are related to areas of the economy that are suffering a lot, and the events that we bring could help to develop again those areas.
I think far too long our industry has actually focused too much on government, and they see us as wanting a handout instead of us taking back our power. And that is by doing. We've got to realize that government should actually come to us, not us going to government.
Everything you've said, SHERRIF, is very, very well said. And I think one of the things we've done in London is exactly that. So, you know, you go to government, you knock on their door, you try and get their help, and they, as Isabel said, because they're only in term for 3 to 5 years, actually, unless it falls within their term of power, they're not generally interested. So we turned it on our head a little bit and said, you know, we'll just create things ourselves. So going back to crowdsourcing, we created London Tech Week. The interesting thing, though, about Tech Week is that government are now coming to us. and saying, how can we leverage your event and how can we get involved and how can we do things? Cybos, we just held it a couple of weeks ago. And we did a huge amount of work with DIT. So our Department of Trade and Industry wanted to come and use Cybos as a platform. And that's where we got, Britain helped us, the Visit Britain side of it. So it's starting to become a thing that you build it, they will come.
And that model of bureau is actually being rolled out. I'm not saying that London was the instigator, but it is a model that has been adapted by many cities across the world.
We are beginning to see elements of destinations working with educational institutions, with the local stakeholders and the enterprise in a specific sector. And that's already coming to play with that collaboration with the meeting planners and the associations and the destination.
We had an inaugural last year around malaria. We brought all of the world's leading exponents on the disease of malaria into Melbourne. These are initiatives coming out of our ambassador program where global experts in a particular field recognise the need to gather expertise, and they come to us and say, can you help us build a conference?
I think this is a great opportunity for us to restart that conversation so that we explain to governments not just the direct economic benefits of holding an event and not just the benefits in terms of accelerating those business deals and business conversations and using events to really regenerate industries, which is what we know we can do, but also then that third element is that long-term legacy impact on the city and the knowledge economy within that destination. And this is really the moment where we can really utilize this manifesto and the communication that we have to explain that value and how that really works.
Taking Greg's language and using that to government will cut through. And so I think as an industry, we need to change the narrative. We really do need to change the narrative, and it needs to be around that innovation, around that education, knowledge, and the experience economy. I know I've heard him talk of that and the visitor economy coming together, but it's our academic institutions that are at the backbone of our cities and our countries as well.
So that we are seen as industry enhancers rather than simply as the deliverers of great events that happen to be about a certain industry. We change the angle of that narrative.
Change the narrative. Think about the language that Greg's using. I think governments will sit up and take notice.
I think the penny is dropping. I hope the penny is dropping. Governments are realising more how important this industry is. Their ears are opening, and this is our opportunity to be heard and to become a strategic partner.
There's always going to be the challenge of having different political priorities in different countries and regions.
No two markets are the same. No two legislations are the same. And what works here won't necessarily work over there.
But everyone involved, from CVBs, venues, hotels, PCOs, DMCs, event companies, and performers, we all need to survive until the normalization process starts, until the new type of normal is established, and we can successfully do business again. So the governments have all the power to ease this process substantially if they understand the economic and social significance of the industry.
The European Union is preparing to have a lot of money ready for our industry, especially for our industry. They also said first go to your national and local governments, because this is where the spin-off is, of course, is directly.
The EU authorities, I have to say, in this crisis are very open. They listen a lot, very attentive, and they also really use our arguments to be put into their drafts for the recovery plans, for the recovery measures, for the budgets. But at the same time, we offer them platforms and stress that we want to be part of the solution of this crisis too. We're not only demanding, we can also offer them something.
So that we are the fastest of all fast tracks to economic recovery.
I borrowed a pledge from the iceberg that associations and their events are not in the long queue for helping in the recovery post-COVID, but in the short queue to help these recoveries, this together with our partner cities, the regions, the destinations. Let's do what is needed to make sure that we continue to be relevant and make this world a good place to live for all. After COVID-19, let us return to better.
Greg, what do you think of our manifesto, and does it change the narrative?
Well, I think it's absolutely what needs to be done. And I've read the draft manifesto, and I think it's getting us in the right direction. I want to make a couple of areas of emphasis that I think were actually mentioned by Karina and Lynn and by Leslie and Arnaldo, and of course, Jeff. It seems to me that the work that you've already been doing on the kind of economic cost-benefit analysis and defining in greater depth the medium-term legacy, just as Karina said, this is very important. But this is kind of the de minimis activity. This is what you need to do in every industry all of the time if you want support from government. I think there's something extra and additional that's now being required. I think Lynn began to speak about this. I think we need to talk much more about the innovation economy and the experience economy, and how these two super clusters, as it were, connect across different sectors in our economy. So the experience economy is retail, it's hospitality, it's entertainment, it's sport, but it's also health and education and other things. The innovation economy is, of course, science and technology, but it's also creative industries. It's also health and education in other ways. And really what you have to say to city leaders is, what kind of innovation economy, what kind of experience economy we're trying to create in the city in the future as we become competitive again, and how can we use business events as a catalyst and a driver of those? I think there are then sort of three other things I would like to say. The first thing is, I think it's very important to position business events not just as a kind of worthy contender or as something that should not be ignored, but actually to position them as a critical catalyst of recovery. That, if you like, business events are the safe, well-organized, properly resourced activities that city governments can, as it were, back, knowing full well that there will be all sorts of lessons learned about how these business events have gone, that provide opportunities for major sporting events, that provide opportunities for big learning events, that provide, as it were, opportunities for cultural and touristic events and other things. In other words, business events are volunteering to go first, to be the guinea pigs of recovery, in order to provide lessons, insights, and knowledge, which will be generously shared, of course, with these other sectors where convening is also very important. And in this way, business events can position themselves as a leader, as a pioneer, as doing something generous for the rest of the city or the rest of the region. I think the second thing that's very important is to be aware of positioning business events in terms of the agenda that emerges out of COVID-19. Now, when I was speaking a few minutes ago about the 7 big themes, whether it's the zero carbon theme, or whether it's the healthcare and medical services theme, or whether it's the new social capital and equality theme, or whether it's the sovereign capacity and the re-engineering of supply chains to create a more resilient form of globalization, or whether it's work that's happening in how to make digital fair and how to make digital inclusive, we should think about not just how these kinds of themes are reflected in the titles of the conferences and their purpose, but also how these themes become reflected in the way that the business meetings are undertaken. The more we can do that, the more you can position business meetings not just as critical to the recovery, but also as critical ingredients or solutions or powerhouses, if you like, for the long-term future shape of the society and the economy that we wish to have. So, in my opinion, the work that has already been done in the manifesto is great, but I would add to that some of these nuances about the journey towards the new normal and how business events are an absolutely essential part of that journey being taken in a way which is pioneering, intuitive, innovative in itself. The other thing I think I would say, and I say this in a slightly different tone of voice, is that there may be options in all of this not to wait for permission or blessing, but as it were, to take actions that have a demonstration effect, as long as you're really reasonably confident that it will be possible to do that, in ways that will demonstrate to decision makers the importance of accelerating the recovery in the business meetings market first. I'm not quite sure how you do that, but it may be that you can generate all sorts of public opinion around activities. You could host some virtual events and ask people how much more they would enjoy it if they were actually able to visit. These sorts of things may be important.
Greg, one of those themes, of course, is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Here's what our panel had to say about that.
The other thing that I noticed in the manifesto is a reference to the UN SDGs. And what that manifesto talks about is how many of the UN SDGs business events actually support, both environmental and social, because I do think the UN SDGs are going to be even more important as we come out of this crisis.
The SDGs are a very, very valuable tool because they're a form of language which has been adopted in many spheres. And so when you talk in the language of SDGs, you can get the attention of people whose objectives and missions are built around those particular frameworks.
Because all the recovery will be focused on green, sustainability and digitization. This is everything we can deliver, and we can really help a great deal to make all the industries we serve implement that change very quickly.
What I would love to see is that post-COVID-19, we enter an era of the responsible delegate, so that delegates are going to meetings with a strong sense of purpose. They're not simply going to learn to pick up new ideas, to get stimulated, to make some new contacts. They're going because they really want to help solve a particular issue or move something forward. And that could be a business issue, it could be an environmental issue, it could be a societal issue.
Again, I think this is a brilliant idea, absolutely essential and critical to creating a coherent understanding across the business meetings industry about how these particular activities relate to a global agenda. I think it's also important to say that this is not a substitute for something else that all business meetings leaders need to do, which is talk to, as it were, the local sustainable development goals of local leaders, which may not express themselves in terms of the UN form. So I would start with every individual mayor or regional governor or state governor and look carefully at what their strategic agenda is, and I would position business events in the way that they can support them. In other words, every level of government has its own version of the SDGs. And although nearly all of them sign up to the SDGs, what they particularly sign up to is their version or their variation. So I would be careful to nuance the language towards the local variants that make sense. However, focusing on the SDGs is a very good way to provide a coherent narrative across the industry as a whole. I also think that Martin's right, that as it were, the conscious business meeting attendee or delegate, how she or he behaves, how the richness of the experience is made real for them, and how privileged we are, in a sense, to be able to travel the world, to meet one another, to visit locations that are otherwise a long distance from where we live, and to really enrich the place through our visiting, as well as to be enriched by it, is a very important message. And I think he's absolutely right that responsible participation in business events will become critical in the future. Of course, the key link here is to make sure that the important delegates who come to town genuinely have opportunities to meet with local leadership, so that local leadership can benefit from their presence in the city, just as the visitors themselves can benefit from being there.
Greg, you're very fond in your presentations of that apocryphal Chinese curse, "May you live in interesting times." This really has been an extraordinary inflection point, hasn't it? What do you make of how we're going to fare over the next couple of years?
Well, I think it's right to begin with a combination of enthusiasm and sobriety. I do think, as I've tried to say already, that the period of time it takes to get a vaccine, or failing that, the period of time it takes to be able to risk assure groups of the healthiness of gathering together, is going to have a dampening effect for some time. You see, the problem is that governments and regulatory bodies are never paid to take risks with people's lives, whereas entrepreneurs are paid to take risks in bringing together events, putting on fantastic gatherings, and exploiting all of the opportunities that come from having wonderful people together exchanging ideas. The problem is there's a little bit of a mismatch of culture between what governments feel they need to guarantee and what entrepreneurs feel they need to pursue. So I think it's going to be a challenging time. I think that we should see this, though, not as an attempt, as it were, to attack the meetings industry or to stop business events from happening. We should see this overall as an invitation to innovate in the way we combine physical and digital gatherings and make both equally meaningful and exciting, to innovate in the way we bring people together and the mindset that's created both by those who are hosting and those who are visiting. That's going to be very important. The way in which we elongate and elaborate the nature of the connections that are possible, so that the face-to-face connection is not the only kind of connection that is rich. And I think most importantly in all of this, how we ensure that the meetings industry is seen to be something that is in favor of a new normal that is decisively better, richer, more sustainable, and in a sense, more ambitious than the old normal was. The old normal was ambitious. It was entrepreneurial. Business meetings were at the cutting edge of helping to generate new value in all sorts of ways. The new normal needs to be even richer, and we should use the opportunity to make this amazing change to become more agile as an opportunity to be an even better version of what we were before. So I think we have to be optimistic and positive about this and accept that constraint is one of the conditions under which innovation can occur.
Greg, it has been a huge pleasure to hear what you have to say to us today. On behalf of everybody who's been involved in this webinar, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Huge thanks once again to Greg Clark for his extraordinary thoughts today. Huge thanks also to our sponsors, AIM, the Asia Pacific Incentives and Meetings event, IMEX and its new Planet IMEX platform, IBTM and its new IBTM Connect platform, and Meetings Africa. And huge thanks as well to the massive cast of industry luminaries who've contributed to this programme. We could not have made it without all of you. The Joint Meetings Industry Council Manifesto for Economic Recovery Using Business Events is nearing completion, and a final version will be published soon. The content that contributed to its creation is also being made available for further viewing. Interviews were conducted by my Iceberg colleague James Latham. The webinar was engineered by Phil Tobit. Archive video reports were edited by Toby Miller, and the webinar itself edited by yours truly. May this industry, and all of us, very soon be living in less interesting times. From all at JMIC and the Iceberg, and from me, Robert Corrin. Goodbye.